welcome. I'm Rogers Anderson, Williamson County's mayor, and today we kind of have a special show, an educational show, that we get to talk with Brad Coleman, our property assessor here in Williamson County. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a busy time, and hopefully this will be beneficial to everybody.
Yeah. Well, Brad, I know that a lot of people like to know a little bit about the person, where you came from, where'd you go to school, and so kind of fill us in a little bit about the Brad Coleman of a younger years that's now the Brad Coleman of a little bit older era.
Well, I know it's when you talk to people that have been here their whole life, you have to be born and raised. And while I was not born in Williamson County, I was born in Nashville, and my family, as it grew, my parents were looking for a little more house, and we found ourselves in Fairview, and so we moved to Fairview at the start of my 4th grade year. And of course stayed in Fairview throughout my school years, and very connected to the community. Ended up finding my now wife, Carrie, almost high school sweetheart. Sort of, it's borderline. It was her senior year, my freshman year in college, that we officially started dating. And so after school, we got married and started looking for houses, and we ended up buying our first house in Fairview. And then for the very small town story, our second house is about a quarter of a mile from the first house. So we just literally rode the lawnmower to the new house. So that's where we still live, and very active in the community at our church at First Baptist, where we've been going our whole life, and just really connected there. We now have twin 9-year-olds, boy and a girl, so exciting times in the household. But I got into assessments really because I was working 2 jobs and exhausted, and my brother-in-law said, how about you come work up here at the assessor's office for Metro in Davidson County? And with my interest and always been kind of a numbers person, it seemed to make sense and it interested me. So got involved at April Fool's Day of 1999, and here we are 17 years later. The joke's still going, I guess, but it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made, in all honesty.
Well, and you've done an outstanding job, and that's kind of the purpose of us being here today. Just recently, you have mailed out the 2016 new values that you spent better part, well, not you 100%, but you and your staff have spent the better part of the last couple of years working on getting to the point that in early May that you can mail out the new reappraisals. But before we actually get into what that means, let's kind of control a little bit of the conversation. And your job, you're an elected official. For 4 years you have to run, and you've been so good nobody wants to run against you. That's
blessed, yes.
As an elected official, I know how that feels. But if you look at the state law, which is coming out of Nashville, it kind of tells you what your job, your role, and the things you've got to do. You're not just doing this for your health. Right. You're doing it for a reason. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the state law and the way counties across this great state, 95 counties, and some have appraisals on 4-year cycles, some on 5 years, some on 6 years. I guess there's probably some out there with some other variation that I'm not familiar with, but all of your powers and the rules and the regulation come from Nashville. So take us from there, then we'll kind of get into Williamson County.
Right. Yeah. If you start talking about the scope of what the office really does, we could talk for a long time. But if you just look at kind of the departments or the bullets of the office, the most common known and common interest that the normal taxpayer would have would be our residential valuations, which you talked about. And currently we're on a 5-year reappraisal cycle within the county, and so what that's going to take is over 4 years of that 5-year cycle, we are going to visually inspect every home in the county. Now, what does that mean? That's going to be either a drive-by appraisal. We've done a lot of review from the sky with aerial photography, and oblique imaging technology's gotten so incredibly better in the last several years that it's safer and actually more accurate than maybe the way we done it previously. But you're in a constant state of gathering information and qualifying what you already have to ensure that the records we have on file are in fact correct. That takes 4 years to do. 85,000 parcels is where we're at currently. And then in that final year, that 5th year, that's when we're going to come in and start looking at numbers, pulling sales from the past year, and trying to then take those sales and attribute those across all of those parcels in order to come up with an appraised value that we'll send out notices for in that reappraisal year, which is what we're doing right now.
And to continue, which is out of your bucket, I guess that's a good way of saying it. Your job mainly is to set those values based on this new appraisal. Then once you release that information, it is mailed out to the individual homeowners, but then it goes down to our office for the financial data and merging of those numbers so that we can ultimately figure out in our county what does a penny do, what is going to help us set eventually the tax rate. And if you didn't do any appraisals, it would not be a good thing for your community as far as government is concerned, and even for the homeowner, because we're going to see when you get into the appraisals valuation that you all have done, you're going to see a great deal of fluctuation from the residential side all the way to the commercial side. Now you get an average. You're going to see a great fluctuation in the residential side just between communities.
Correct, right.
So the main person of it is to set that, the main reason is to set that value of the home. And I think it's important that the audience understand there are several values. I came out of a career of 26 years talking about insured to value in the insurance world. And so you've got a market value, you've got appraisal value, sometimes they're different. You've got a selling value, oftentimes that's even different.
Right.
And then you've got that old, what we call the insured to value. What's it insurable for? Well, we all know if you're insuring your home, a business, the land's not going anywhere.
Correct.
But many of these values go into this compository rating that you do, but the only one the government cares about is what you do.
Right. Well, and again, law coming out of Nashville that says every county in the state of Tennessee must appraise on a 4, 5, or a 6-year cycle. Prior to that, you could go
10 years.
50 years. I mean, you could go for, there's a couple of an appraisal, I was at an appraisal conference not too long ago, and there was a West Virginia town, I believe, that haven't been appraised since 1956. Well, let's go to Cool Springs and look at 1956 values compared to today. So the purpose of a reappraisal is to bring those values to current market. And we could leave them at what they were previously. If we did, what that would do is create inequity throughout the county, that fluctuation you're talking about. But also, instead of seeing a $2.31 tax rate that we've enjoyed, we'd be at a $30 tax rate. So they work together. You know, I think a lot of times it gets confusing and we begin talking about taxes and what does that mean? Because that's really what a lot of homeowners want to know. What does this mean for me, my tax burden? But there's only two pieces to that puzzle. One is our assessment, and we're charged with being at market value, or as close as we can be, at 100% of value as of January 1st of that reappraisal date. So our efforts are to be at 100% of value as of January 1st, 2016. It's mass appraisal, and so in doing mass appraisal, if we're doing our job correctly according to the state and the auditing folks on us, we're going to be a little high on some, a little low on some, but we want to really be within that 10% window. Between 95% and 105% of value would be deemed a good assessment. Of course, as you were talking earlier about appraisers and even different values, you and I talk about values all the time, and I think I asked you yesterday, what do you think it's worth? What is an appraisal? And an appraisal really is, it's an opinion of value. And so we're going to base that opinion on current market and real numbers. And so it's an educated opinion. But what I want to point out is you could have 3 different appraisers come out today, and more than likely you're going to have 3 different numbers. Now, if all 3 appraisers are worth their salt, those numbers should be pretty close and pretty zoned in. But they're not all going to be exact. And so you've got kind of a margin, a value margin in there.
It's interesting you said that. I was just reflecting. When I moved here in 1980, first house we built. And I think that home was somewhere around $72,000 to $75,000.
Right.
I pulled this up actually couple of days ago just to see. It's kind of interesting. You go back to your first house and see what's worth. That house today has got an appraisal value of nearly $325,000.
Right.
Now, we did make some improvements in it. I've sold it, been out of it for over 20, 25 years. We did make some improvements of it, but I didn't do the difference between 75 and 3 1/4, and neither has anybody else since
Right.
that. But that's what that value is that you all have listed, and over the last 30, 35 years, that home is not only a different value, but it's also a different cost. If you buy that house today, it's going to be in the 325 range too,
Sure.
and which goes into the mortgage side. You got to get a loan to value and da 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 da. I mean, you get all these different things. But let's talk a little bit about our reappraisal. That just, if you haven't received it in the mail, you should be receiving it just within days. And if you don't, there's a way to go online. You can actually pull it up yourself.
Sure.
and look at it. Let's talk a little bit about the last 5 years that all that data has been put together. Kind of take a snapshot of what we're looking at across the county, averages, residential and commercial.
Right. Well, and we would say from viewers watching us right now, they should have received that tax notice, a 3.5 by 5 green background. It's going to have a couple of things on it that you really want to pay attention to. One of those being that appraised value and how we've kind of come up with that. If you look back over the past 5 years, in the last reappraisal, 2011, you and I were having a much different conversation. We were right in the middle of the recession, and while Williamson County was protected in relationship to the rest of the nation, really, our values still stalled and fell in some areas more than other, obviously. But we were a little bit protected from the tremendous losses and hardships that a lot of the nation had. But we were starting to come out of that in 12, and it seemed like, I don't know if the word's optimistic, but it seemed like things were starting to move a little bit. And fast forward to 2013, a lot of buildings started picking back up. Our permitting started back. And with that, an influx of people coming into our county and for the jobs that we have, it felt like the real estate market was waking up in 13. Fast forward to 14, it's alive and vibrant, and then 15 has been just an outstanding year for real estate. We're adding over 2,500 homes a year, and if you look at what percentages did in the last year.
Now, that's new homes and existing homes?
That's
countywide,
you
city?
name it. That's right. And again, some areas have been slower to rebound than others. My hometown of Fairview, it really hadn't seen that growth until the past 2 years. And I think Fairview's really on the cusp of catching up with what Franklin and others are doing, not necessarily in quantity of new construction, but as a percentage, it will be. And so I think people are looking to build and looking to buy in that area as well. So we're seeing those increases in values really throughout the county at this point. But if you take all 5 years and you put them all together and you're looking for just real generic numbers and averages, we're going to go up in this reappraisal 27% overall. So that's a big number. Within that 27%, our commercial side is higher at 36%. Our residential is at 24%. And it's funny, I was talking to a realtor friend just the other day, and she said, what are your averages looking like? And I said, well, residential is about 24%. And she had a real strong reaction to, oh, wow, 24%, that seems like heavy. And I said, well, let me ask you something. I said, what do you think it's done in the last year? And she goes, oh, good grief, 15%. Now, that might have been a bit of an exaggeration, but when you start talking about a 5-year period of time, 24%, that's less than 5% a year. And I think the majority of people almost have grown to expect that their home's going to raise around 4% a year. We've just seen phenomenal appreciation of value in this past year, and really things are quite positive throughout the county.
So kind of explain the mechanics of the reappraisal. You send it to the state. State signs off on it. You bring it down to the finance side. We do our gyrations with it, and this is a number, a tax rate or certified tax rate would be developed out of that. So what happens to the person that's got the average home in Williamson County is probably somewhere around $400,000 now. Let's just throw that number as easy math. And let's say this person adds $50,000 addition or $100,000 addition onto their house next year. Do you pick up that $100,000 when they add it through the permitting processes or whatever mechanics you use? Or do you wait for another 4 or 5 years to pick up that $100,000?
Right. Yeah. Again, part of the whole reappraisal process is to have the most current and accurate data as we can. If you build a $100,000 addition onto your home and you're going to do the proper procedures, go through planning and permit the workout, we're going to get a copy of that permit that's going to flag us that Mayor Anderson's building an addition onto his place. That's going to flag us that something's going on, and we're going to wait a month or so, and then we're going to come out and visit the property. Anytime there's a change made to the property, we're going to come out and actually inspect it, pull tape on it. We're going to actually measure that property, not only to get the quantity, the size of the addition, but also the quality. What kind of materials are being used? Is it like the rest of the house? Because all that matters. And again, in talking with people, anything that would add value to your home, we want to address that. So if it's from your patio all the way to your basement, is your basement finished out? And if so, what is the quality of the finish? We have a lot of basements in Williamson County that are nicer than some folks' main levels. So, but it all matters. Everything that matters. If you were going to, at the end of the day, the big question to look at is, what would I hope to get for my house if I put it on the market today? And that's kind of a starting spot. And you get a lot of different reactions when you ask that question. Some people know exactly what they think their house is worth. Then the other people say, well, how would I know? And so it's kind of, and everything in between. But in your scenario, we're going to look at that addition, and then we're going to add that $100,000 to your property as of January 1st of the following year after completion.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that the appraisal value will certainly increase, but your tax rate may or may not.
Right. Well, and that's every year stands on its own.
That's
so
right.
If we look over the last 5 years and you added $1,000 or $100,000 addition to your house, your taxes would have went up appropriate to that because our tax rate has remained the same. What we're looking at this year is anytime there's a reappraisal year, we're going to start working on what we call a certified tax rate. And so right now where we're at, you and I are talking about preliminary numbers. And so we're trying to see a preliminary rate that's going to be well under $2, which is a big difference from the $231 that we're currently at.
Well, there's a misconception since you brought that up, that you do a reappraisal, your taxes automatically go up. Can't happen.
It's not true, not necessarily true. That certified tax rate, the purpose of it would be to maintain revenue neutrality through the county. The county cannot receive a windfall of revenue because of the reappraisal on its own. Now, if we look back at the last couple of reappraisals, I think it's the best way to explain that certified tax rate because we've operated two different ways in the last two reappraisals. If we look back at 2006, the market was much like it is right now. We had a thriving economy, the housing market was doing wonderful in the 5 years leading up to the reappraisal of 2006. So in that reappraisal, we took values up 30% overall on average. Well, at the time, the tax rate was $2.84. Certified tax rate came in at $2.31 or 53 cents less. And then at the July County Commission meeting, that certified tax rate was adopted. No tax increase, maintained revenue neutral throughout the county. Fast forward 5 years to 2011, we only went up 10% overall. And with that, the certified tax rate went from $2.31 down to $2.09. What happened in the July meeting was a tax increase of 22 cents because of the needs of the county. I know you showcase all the time why people want to be here. Williamson County has a ton of reasons for people to move here, but that all costs money, and so in 2011 it was deemed a tax rate increase of 22 cents was necessary. So was that increase in taxes because of the reappraisal? No, it was because of the tax increase. But likewise, in 2006, the average person didn't pay more in taxes. And so it's kind of the tale of two different stories. So where we're looking at now, we're increasing 27% overall, tax rate below $2. We'll see where that lands at the end.
So Brad, I know that you've just finished, and so probably some folks getting a little vacation, breathing a little bit.
Oh, not yet. Not yet.
But you're actually starting already on the next recycle period or reappraisal period about the time you finish because of our community continues to grow. I would be the first to admit, and I know you know this too, that growth never pays 100% of its ride.
Right.
And so as a taxpayer and as the mayor, you, in your role and the people watching this, and the message I want to send out to everyone is just because there's a reappraisal does not mean that your tax rate will drop, and doesn't mean you're going to be paying more taxes. Doesn't mean you won't. County Commission's got to make that choice based on the needs, new schools and roads and all the things that go with that. But the appraisal itself, you do not control anything with the taxes whatsoever, and that's the message that I need to get out. Now let's say that somebody, because we've got about 15 more minutes, probably less than that. Let's say somebody doesn't agree with Brad Coleman or his people's assessment. Is there any room for error? I mean, everybody makes errors.
Sure.
But what's the process?
Well, and that's the reason you talk about taking a breath. We're not breathing yet. With notices just now going out, the next step is educating and defending. Sounds like the wrong word, but really we're going to look at our values, and if they're right, we're going to defend them, and if they're wrong, we're going to change them. And so I described it as we've been painting this picture for 5 years, and now we're going to put it up here for the world to critique our picture. 85,000 notices for real property went out in the mail this past week. People are getting those postcards, they're looking at them, they're saying, these guys did a good job, or maybe they didn't do such a good job. And so what we would encourage people to do is to call in. We anticipate about a 4 to 5% appeal percentage. So if you're looking at that, you're looking at somewhere around 4,000 phone calls, emails, or walk-ins that we're going to have a conversation with. I guess the most important part of the appeal process is, first of all, when you're calling in, know what you think your house is worth. If you think we're wrong, then what do you think it's worth and why? I mean, obviously I can say this table's worth whatever I want it to be, but I need to have some sort of basis for what that market is. So, be proactive and look at what's going on in your neighborhood, what are houses selling for. I had a phone caller this morning, and the guy was shocked at what things in his neighborhood had sold for, and he started laughing, and he goes, I need to hang up before you reappraise it again. And we're seeing that throughout the county. And so the majority of the appeal process is a phone call. And inside that phone call, we're going to do a lot of educating, and then we're going to do a lot of listening to see what the homeowner thinks that house is worth. And for the large majority of the cases, there's going to be resolution met in that phone call. Whether we change it or not, either we change it and homeowner appreciates that value, or they understand why we had the value the way it was. 90% of those phone calls are going to end with an understanding of why and what it is. Now, beyond that, you can go to the County Board of Equalization, which will meet throughout the month of June. It's made up of 5 individuals throughout the county that
they're your peers.
Yeah, and they're not affiliated with our office, so they're just here.
I'm talking when I say they're your peers, they're taxpayers.
Right? Yeah, they're taxpayers in Williamson County, just like the appellant, and so they're there to hear your voice and respond accordingly. Beyond that, you can go to the State Board of Equalization and Assessment Appeals. For the majority of our viewers today, residential homeowners, the appeal process is a phone call. But again, the more educated you can be about your property, the better. A lot of things that confuse people are what the appraisal is, and so I'll say again, that appraised value, if we're doing our job appropriately, should be what you could get for it on the open market as of January 1st of this year. Now, inside of residential, we assess at 25% for residential classification. So in your example, a $400,000 home assessed at 25%, it's going to be a $100,000 assessment rate. And that's what your taxes are based off of. Your tax rate, it goes against your assessment rate, $2.31 per $100 of assessment. So the assessment's not it's not your bill. A lot of people get really nervous. They say, this assessment's what I got to pay you? No, that's 25% of your total appraisal, and your tax bills will be determined after the July meeting for the tax rate, and then a tax roll will be delivered to the trustee, and Ms. Karen Paris will mail out tax bills in October.
Brad, so one of the other misconceptions that I often hear when running into people, and you get the lion's share of the phone calls, but we get our share too.
Sure.
And so why not speed that process instead of having the appraisal every 5 years, why not have it every year?
Mm-hmm. big animal.
It is.
It's something you and I have discussed, and others have discussed. What are the benefits of having a more frequent reappraisal? Obviously, you'd have less fluctuation in values. If we're going up 4% a year and we move to a 4-year cycle, we'd be looking at around 16% instead of 20%. So you have a shorter period of time. Your value should be more reflective of market, and so that flux would be shortened. The other benefit would be equity. I always, in every speech I do, I talk about fairness and equity. If we have a banner that we're waving over our office, that banner is fairness and equity. We want to treat people the same throughout the county and be fair with them. And so if you have a $400,000 house and so does your neighbor, then y'all both ought to be taxed the same. And so we try to look at that. Anytime there's the longer amount of time between reappraisals, the more room for inequity throughout the county. And so that would be a good reason.
Got about 2 minutes left to go on our show, and I want to say thanks for coming down and explaining. But if there's something I've overlooked, then let's bring it out at this time. So we should have them in our possession by the time this show runs. If you got a question or concern, call your office. Mm-hmm. Go online. You can go online to the Williamson County website and click on the property assessor and it's really a very simple process. Mm-hmm. Type in your address or type in your name. It comes on. You click on that and you get all the data. Yeah. You can check on your neighbors. There's no privacy in that. That's all public information.
It's all public record. And on the database search, I'd even point out the less information you put in, the better. A lot of people say, I can't get mine pulled up. Well, for you, I'd advise just putting Anderson in or just your street name and nothing else. The less information, sometimes better because it has to be exact. But look at that database, see what the value of your parcel is. It'll have some comparables on there. If you scroll down to the bottom, if we're looking at Whitehall Farms and we look up your house, there will be some comparable sales within the last 12 months that we'll list for you, and that gives you an idea of what is sold. But if I kind of want to spotlight real quickly, I would say the main thing to remember, look at that notice. Come up in your mind with what you think your house is worth. If you were hoping to sell it today, what would you get for it? If that appraised value is within reason of that, then you can be grateful that we've done a good job. But remember, that's a 5-year reappraisal. We do it once every 5 years. So don't think that we've increased your value 25%
in 1 year.
In 1 year. That's been over 5 years. The assessment, again, is 25% of that total. We'll know what the tax rate is in July, and that's what the bill will be in October.
Brad Coleman's been with us today. I hope you've copied all this down. If you got a question, you can call him at 790-615-790-5708. Or if you want to talk about an appeal, turn that card over, and it's got the appeal hotline on the back for residential and commercial, and that way you can speak directly with an appraiser. Can't do all this work without my staff of 28 folks. I mean, it's a big operation, and we've just talked about a little bit of it today. Thank you for being with us. I'm Rogers Anderson.